He essentially cast a vote that could have ended the fellowship that I had at the time. And I've always been a person who believes in doing the most that you can do at any given moment to make a difference and make your voice heard. So back when I was a student, I said, I'm not going to let that stand. And I actually sent back press releases. I found another student originally from the area here who was also doing his PhD in my same program at Yale. We both sent back press releases. And we got 2 of the local papers in the northern part of the district to actually write articles about this. And to write articles criticizing McClintock for voting to take funding away from young people from the region. So that was my first, little salvo in the war against McClintock back in 2012. But since then, you all know too well, he's gotten reelected and reelected because people don't run against him in a serious way. And this is the year that we can change that, and that we're already changing that. So I'm very grateful to you all for coming out, getting involved, and looking carefully at your options in this race, because this is a race that really matters. It matters for our community. We urgently need a representative who actually cares about the practical needs of people here, who's really going to stand up for jobs, for better policies, to prevent wildfires and protect our communities, for high quality, affordable health care, for great public schools, and really be accountable to people here in the community. That's one of the reasons why I'm going around and doing these town halls, even before the election. One of the commitments I've made is that if elected, I would do 10 town halls per year. I would come at least once to every county in our district and, have an open back and forth like this. I think you all deserve much better constituent services than what you're getting right now from McClintock. He's only got one office. One office, which is up in Roseville. It's hours and hours and hours away from you. If you needed to have some help with some federal benefits, or had another issue where you needed to visit someone there for constituent services, right now you just have to wait until somebody comes by for their little monthly office hours, or whenever they show up for a few hours. You can only see them on their schedule. It makes it really hard for people to get the services they need, especially in the southern part of our district. So that's why I would open 2 offices if elected. It's very uncommon for a representative that represents such a large area to only have one office and to have it be, on such a geographic extreme of the district. I think we really need a second office, maybe in Sonora or some other kind of surrounding area down here. I really like Mariposa a lot, so in my mind Mariposa is a candidate, but Sonora is a bit bigger, so it might win out at the end of the day. So those are some of the specific things, that I'd really like to change if elected. But today's really about you, and it's really about you getting to ask questions and share your comments. Even if you just have a comment, you're welcome to write it down, and we'll go ahead and read it out. So I want to turn the floor over to Tom, our moderator, who's going to run us through the questions.
First question is, it seems that immigration and anti-sanctuary rhetoric will be used to get Republicans to the polls in November. And this question is, how will you and your campaign respond to the issue?
Absolutely. I think it is right to say that right now in California especially, some Republicans are intentionally using the issue of immigration and a lot of rhetoric to try to make people fearful and to try to make people afraid. I think it's really important to stand up against that, but to do so in 2 ways. The first is to say that if you actually care about immigration enforcement and you want to talk to somebody who has done immigration enforcement and enforced our country's laws, you should be talking to me. I've done thousands of visa interviews, and unfortunately I had to deny most of those people who were applying for visas because they did not meet the requirements to actually get the visa they were applying for and actually come to our country. So I know very well the importance of enforcing our immigration laws. I understand very clearly the importance of having secure borders. I think the question is just, how do we go about doing that in a way that actually makes sense? In a way that's actually a good use of taxpayer dollars and is going to do the most possible to secure the borders, to keep us safe, but also to allow people to come and go legally if we need to. So I support smart uses of technology to secure the southern border. And no, a giant wall is not a smart use of technology or of taxpayer dollars. We know it would actually be a huge amount of wasteful government spending. I think that we need to set up an exit tracking system to keep track of when people leave the US, because this was actually recommended by the 9/11 Commission years and years ago. Right now, if someone comes to the US with a visa, we typically don't know if that person left on time or not, or where they left from. And this is a major security issue when people are trying to renew their visas. It's important, for consular officers to be able to tell if their patterns of travel actually match up with what they were supposed to be doing. If someone said they were going to Disneyland, you shouldn't see them leave from New York State 3 years later. So I think that, Congress should actually step up and fund the implementation of a full exit tracking system, which hasn't happened in years. So those are really concrete things that we can do that I think we do need to do to improve enforcement. But at the same time, I do support a pathway to citizenship for people who are here right now, who are undocumented, who can pay fees and pass background checks. And I also think that we absolutely have to have a Clean Dream Act. And I think it's really important to keep the issue of the Dreamers separate from all of the polarizing rhetoric, from getting tied up in debates about the budget or held hostage in other negotiations. We know that the majority of Americans support a Clean Dream Act. For our Dreamers, our DACA recipients that are here, or DACA eligibles, young people who are here in our district. The question is, why do we have a Congress that's ignoring the will of the American people right now? And it's because of the House leadership. It's because they won't even allow a Clean Dream Act to come up for a vote. And that's wrong. That's something that we can change straight away if we change control out of the House.
This question has two parts. Let me tell you the question and then to answer it in two parts. The question is, how will you save Social Security and Medicaid and the environment? Maybe you can do with Social Security and Medicaid first. And I'll remind you.
Medicaid?
Medicaid,
Okay.
but I think Medicaid, Medicare works.
Yeah.
And then I'll remind you to touch on the environment.
Okay, great. All right, so we've got a lot of huge issues there in one question. Someone made a very efficient use of your note card. I like that. So let's start with Social Security. There's a lot of scare tactics around Social Security right now. You'll hear that Social Security is going to go bankrupt tomorrow, that your benefits aren't going to be there when you need them. There are actually some solutions out there and some things that we could do to shore up Social Security, that are pretty straightforward. So the first and biggest thing I think we need to do is eliminate the cap on the payroll tax that funds Social Security. So right now, if you're earning money, people only pay the payroll tax for Social Security up to about $127,000 a year of income. And then after that, people who are earning very high incomes don't pay anymore. Someone could be earning $1 million, right? And then they're not paying Social Security tax on the majority of their earnings. And that makes very little sense. This is one of the only taxes in our country right now that's regressive. Someone who has, pretty low earnings for the year, even when I was scooping my ice cream and making sandwiches and things like that, I was getting taxed on every single dollar of my earnings. But somebody who's quite wealthy ends up not paying this tax on the majority of their earnings. So I think we need to eliminate that cap. And doing that would actually bring enough revenue into Social Security, that it would close about 90% of the gap in funding going forward. It's one big thing we can do, and something that I think we really need to push for. So that would be my top priority when it comes to Social Security. When it comes to Medicare and Medicaid, I think there are a lot of ways that we can save money and also save those programs. I think it's unconscionable that right now we have a GOP that's driven up our national debt with their tax bill voluntarily by passing it, and all of a sudden they're screaming about how we need spending reform because they're just so concerned about the national debt. And by spending reform, they mean cuts to really critical programs that are a lifeline. And so I was really opposed to some of the proposals that came out last year that would have capped the amounts of spending for Medicaid. That would have potentially cut off some seniors who rely on Medicaid for long-term care in nursing homes, providing them with no other alternatives. When it comes to Medicare, I think the biggest thing we need to do going forward is both, oppose cuts that are being proposed to it, but also make sure that we get Medicare negotiated for prescription drugs. That would be a good way to save quite a bit of money that we could then pour into improving the rest of the program and the benefits they're offering.
The environment, how will you save the environment?
That's a big one. All right, so we'll keep it a little bit general. I think that one of the things that's most alarming and concerning to me right now is that we as a country have made so much progress when it comes to protecting the environment, and protecting our own health and well-being and safety over the last 30 or 40 years. And those basic protections are now in jeopardy. There's a cohort of people in Washington, D.C., including Tom McClintock, including Scott Pruitt, including Donald Trump, and the like, who actually want to roll back those hard-fought protections. And it makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, why on earth would we want to have higher levels of pollution in our drinking water? Who here wants to breathe in dirtier air? Does anybody here? You almost put your hand up. Do you seriously want to breathe in dirtier air? Okay, all right. Because, I'll tell you who wants us to breathe in dirtier air. Tom McClintock. He has been opposed to California's stronger vehicle emission standards the entire time they've been in place. And now we're in a dangerous moment because now we have an administration that actually kind of agrees with him. We are at real risk of seeing just really common sense protections stripped away from us. And this is not an abstract thing. This is not about saving butterflies and salamanders. This is about our health and well-being. If you have breathing issues, you don't want to be unable to breathe and unable to go outside. This affects everybody, no matter what age you are. I have little tiny kids, 2 of whom were born kind of premature. Last year we had to cancel our plans on Labor Day weekend because the air was just too dirty for us to even go outside. I was supposed to have gone to a labor picnic with my whole family. I just said, I'm not taking my kids out to breathe in this air today. It's just not safe for them. So if we really value independence, we really value freedom, and we want the freedom to go about our lives the way we want to, I think it's really important that we have a clean, safe, healthy environment to do that in. And I'm appalled that right now we have a representative who is trying to take that away from us and literally have us living in a dirtier environment. I'll say really quickly on the environmental stuff also that it's a little bit more abstract, but I think that fighting climate change is really important for our district. So many of the challenges that we're facing here, whether we're talking about droughts, an extended fire season, changes in temperatures that are threatening local agriculture, a lot of that's tied back to climate change. And I think there are a lot of great things we can do here at the local level. We should be investing in building green energy jobs. We should be investing in renewable energy. But I think that's not enough. I think you should demand better of somebody who's really running to replace Tom McClintock. And so something that distinguishes me from the other Democrats in the race is that I actually believe we need strong action at the federal level to reduce and curb greenhouse gas emissions and get at the root cause of all those other downstream negative consequences we're living in our district. I'm the only person running who supports a carbon fee and dividend. I would also join the Climate Solutions Caucus if elected. And that's a bipartisan group that wants to work to fight climate change at the federal level. And I think our district deserves a seat at the table when that's happening. We have Tahoe, we have Yosemite. We shouldn't be left out of those conversations.
Can I comment too?
Yeah.
For people in the room, when you've got a completed comment card, just raise your hand and one of the volunteers will come grab it and take it in front for you. And people that are on the live for Facebook, just type it in the comments and Emma will create a card for you.
That's right.
Thanks.
Yeah. She is your conduit between the virtual world and the real world.
Whoa.
Spooky. All right, let's see here.
Please explain in detail what you will do to end the senseless gun violence, in particular mass shootings in schools, malls, churches, concerts, and so on.
All right, so this is a really important question. I think that, for far too many of us, and especially too many students in our country, gun violence has become almost something that they expect. It absolutely broke my heart, not just the shooting that just happened recently in Texas, but reading the comments and some of the quotes from the students from that school. They were saying things like, I always kind of actually thought it would happen here. They've been describing ways about how even before this happened, they would sometimes sit in their classes and think about where the doors are, where the exits are, if someone came into their classroom, who would get shot first. I mean, I've actually lived in an environment for years where there are really high rates of gun violence. In Guatemala, I mean, unfortunately, Guatemala has one of the highest rates of gun violence in the world. And, you know, I know what it's like to think those kinds of thoughts when you go into a restaurant or you're out in public, and to be on really high alert all the time. And there were reasons why we're on really high alert all the time, because that was the kind of place where, you know, there would be shootings in broad daylight in Guatemala City. It was not uncommon. You know, this never happened to me directly, but it was always within the realm of possibility that you could be sitting in a restaurant and people could start shooting each other in the street, and people could get shot, you know, in the front of the restaurant that we were sitting in, or things like that. This did happen to foreign diplomats that were there. So that was an environment where, you know, we were on pretty high alert, and we were thinking in this kind of tactical way, and there were reasons for it. There is no reason why our high school students should be thinking that way while they're in school. So this is really concerning to me, and I think that we do need to do everything possible to change the status quo. The status quo is completely unacceptable in our country right now. The question is, how do we get there, right? I think we need to do several different things. In terms of reducing gun violence in the country as a whole, I think the single highest impact thing we could do would be to implement universal background checks at the federal level, and actually really have a robust background check system that does not have loopholes for private sales, does not have loopholes for gun shows, and be really careful and attentive to make sure that the right information is getting fed into the background check system. You know, that, for example, somebody with a history of domestic violence while they're in the military, you know, that information is actually getting into the system the way it's supposed to be. So, in my mind, that has to be step one, because we know that an alarming percentage of the transactions in this country every year happen without a background check at all. You know, from the reading that I've done, it seems like this would be the one highest impact thing that we could do. I also support reviving the federal ban on assault weapons. There's absolutely no reason why those types of weapons should be in circulation in our country and in the hands, you know, of people who could potentially use them to do great harm very quickly to others. But then I think we also need to think about what we can do to support students and families. You know, people are under a lot of stress in our country right now. We're not investing properly in education. You know, there are even threats, cuts proposed to public education from the federal level. I think that we actually need to make sure that we're giving our schools the resources to have counselors, you know, and have counselors that have a decent ratio of counselors to students, so they can keep better track of students who are having trouble, students who are under a lot of stress, you know, students who might be behaving oddly, and then hopefully we can connect those people with the services that they need. You know, but I want to be very clear that some people will only focus on mental health and only focus on those kinds of supportive services when they're talking about how to prevent mass shootings in our country. And so I just want to make it crystal clear that that's not my position. I think that it is absolutely essential that we take action, especially to push for background checks first, but that at the same time, you know, it's also important to make sure that students and families have the resources they need, so that if people do have mental health challenges, you know, we can get them the support that they need.
This question wants to know, how will you support arts funding in schools?
That's a great question. So, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the shortfalls that school districts experience in California are the fault of the state of California. Our education funding is not where it should be at the state level. I think we're 41st in the country in per pupil funding going to our schools. Yet we have Silicon Valley, we have Hollywood, you know, we have tremendous wealth in our state. And part of this is a question for the state legislature. You know, this is why you should be talking to the people running for those state legislative offices. You should be talking to Tom Pratt, you should be talking to Carla Jean Neal, and really finding out what they're going to do to try to fix the, I think, crisis of funding to our public schools in California. That said, my question, I guess, to myself would be, what can we do at the federal level to make things a bit better for our schools? I should say that I'm a strong supporter of the arts. You know, I think it's really important, really valuable. My understanding, and if the person who asked the question wants to give me some more information at the end, I'm very open to that. You know, my understanding, at least from talking to people in some of our school districts, is that most of the funding they would use for arts is actually transferred around kind of internally within the district. and is not coming directly from the federal government. The big hole in a lot of school districts' budget, though, that does involve the federal government is special education. The federal government is not meeting its obligations to fund special education right now, even though school districts are mandated to provide special education services to every student who needs them. So, in a roundabout way, I think the biggest hole that the federal government can help fill for our school districts is to fund special education. And if we did that, then our districts would have more money left to keep arts programs, to invest in vocational programs, to keep agricultural programs. I mean, I've literally heard stories of schools having to cut all those types of programs in order to meet their special education obligations because the federal government is not paying for what it should be paying for in that area. So I apologize if that's a little bit of a circuitous answer, but I think in my mind, probably the best way to support this would actually be to make sure that the federal government meets its obligations to pay for special education and frees up more funding for districts to support those arts programs.
Question wants to know, how can you help us with improved rural internet?
Oh, this is a huge issue. So who here is happy with your internet access that you have at your home? All right, I see one person who's happy. I see a thumbs down, I see some eyes rolling, I see some heads shaking. You got lucky, man. I don't know how you won the lottery here. This is a huge issue, and it's really a limiting factor for people who want to start a business, anybody who wants to take a class online, people who want to do telemedicine. I mean, we were just talking about mental health, and there can be a real shortage of providers in rural areas. This can be exactly where it makes sense for people to be able to do telemedicine appointments and things. Not possible if you can't get high-speed internet. So I absolutely think that this is very much like rural electrification at this point. I think it's a necessity. I view it as an essential utility. I think that we absolutely need to do more at the federal level to make sure that we're getting internet service out here. And there are programs in place right now to give telecom companies incentives to come here. They need to be much stronger. I mean, clearly what we're doing right now is not working. So I would favor expanding those programs. I also think it's really important not to be changing rules to allow telecom companies to skate by without actually moving out into the areas they're supposed to be moving out into. So to give you an example, there's a rule that they're supposed to build 1 mile of rural line for every mile of urban line that they lay. Sort of parity. Under the Trump administration, sorry, you're shaking your head. Okay, so if you're a telecom company and you build a line of, you lay a mile of high-speed line in Sacramento, you're then also required to go lay a mile of line, high-speed line out into, I don't know, let's just say,
Mariposa.
well, Mariposa, yeah, I was trying to think of somewhere really far away, but yours aren't that far away. Like out to Mariposa or something like that, right? So that, if you're building in an urban area, you have to be building in rural areas also. The Trump administration, the FCC under Trump, went and changed that rule slightly so that now a telecom company can satisfy the requirement to go out into rural areas by building more high-speed line in rural areas that are already served by the provider. So they can basically double and triple up and quadruple up in the closest rural areas, but they're not being forced to build out into the farther places that they need to get to. So, they've basically been given kind of a free pass where, maybe they never get to Mariposa. Maybe they're only building in the place that's right next to a bigger city, and they can just keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing that. So what this means is those people in rural areas that are close to big cities are going to have quite a few options, whereas a lot of you are going to be left stranded entirely. And that really subverts the purpose of that law and that requirement in the first place. So I think this is an instance where Congress needs to go back and be more specific and not leave that up just to the interpretation of the FCC, but actually say no. To fulfill this requirement, to fulfill the spirit of what we're trying to do here, we need to require you to be building out into new areas in rural communities so that we're getting service to more people. So hopefully that makes sense, but there is a role for the federal government here. I think it's very important, and Tom McClintock right now is very dismissive toward the issue and has actually voted against federal support for rural broadband at least twice. I know this is a really smart investment in our community. It's something that's pro-business, it's pro-education, it's completely got a ton of bipartisan support here in the district, and it should be a priority for all of us.
There's several questions on what to do about the health of our forests. The national forests, in particular, there are quite concerns about fire, about salvage logging, and especially also in relationship to climate change. So what are you going to do about the national forests and about the public lands in our state, in this district, relative to our immediate death, the fire danger, salvage logging, and climate change?
All right, there's a lot of things. So we have a whole bunch of questions there about forests and public lands. The first thing I'll say is I think it's really important that we're actually funding our agencies appropriately that work on and manage those lands. I mean, the Forest Service in particular has just been deprived of resources and deprived of the people that it needs for years and years. And, I sometimes feel like it's an agency that's being set up to fail. Or that there's an intentional effort by some members of Congress, such as Tom McClintock, to deny them the funding that they need to do their job effectively, and then be able to say, oh look, the government's not getting the job done, the Forest Service is not getting the job done. We have no choice left but to bring in private logging companies. I think that's really misguided logic. The obvious solution to me seems to be to help the Forest Service with a bit more resources so they can actually hire the people they need, certainly not to have them facing hiring freezes. So that's, I think, a basic first step that I definitely would do quite differently than Tom McClintock. When it comes to forest management, we do certainly have some parts of our forests that are quite overgrown due to years of mismanagement. We do need to be doing some careful selective thinning of those areas. But again, the vision that Tom and I have is quite different. He favors bringing in private logging companies, and unfortunately, the type of work that needs to be done in our forests often involves removing the very young trees, some of the trees that are not so commercially valuable. So I don't really see a way to get private logging companies really in there doing the work in the way that makes the most sense environmentally. I think that this really is a job for our federal government to be managing our federal lands in the most appropriate way possible. When it comes to fire prevention,
Excuse me, are you proposing that the Forest Service actually do the logging, Forest Service personnel do the tree cutting and the removal?
Yeah, to the greatest extent possible, yeah. Although, if you have other information about this, or you think that's not a good idea for some reason, I'd be very happy to hear it from you. I think that if they had close control over projects and needed to bring in other contractors to do the work also, we'd have to look at the scale of the project, their staffing, what's available. But I think having them in the decision-making role
decision-making versus actually out doing the cutting and felling. So I just want to clarify that. Because I am pretty familiar with the Forest Service.
Yeah. So in terms of the specifics of staffing those kinds of projects, I think I would have to look at the specific project and look at how they typically do things now. But in terms of decision-making, I certainly don't approve of the idea of turning over large tracts of land to private companies and giving them the ability to do large-scale logging and calling that healthy forest maintenance. I completely disagree with that approach. But I'm honestly not familiar with how they staff their projects currently. So of course we would want to look at realistically how they're doing that.
I have an idea about that. We have here in Mariposa, we have a biomass project, as you probably know. And if the Forest Service personnel were identifying trees that were creating an unhealthy forest, and then a private contractor said, okay, these are the trees, and we'll divert these within a 30-mile radius of each biomass plant, then that might be a productive and agreeable solution.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of biomass. I think that it can make a lot of sense. I think it's a good use of, again, some of this product from the forest that's not really commercially marketable in any other way. I think it's a great idea. I'm very supportive of the plan and the project here. On fire, I just wanted to say quickly that I do think we need to flip around the way we think about fire prevention. I think that too much of, well, first of all, for years and years and years, we've had a situation where too much money has been devoted to fire suppression, and has been stolen from our fire prevention funding. So I very much support the efforts that are underway right now to restore that hard boundary between fire prevention funding and fire suppression funding. so that we can actually do the fire prevention work that we need to do. But then I think we still need to have a much broader discussion about how we're actually going about preventing fire and having fire-resistant, fire-resilient communities. And, I'm always very open to your feedback because you guys have lived this, and this is something that affects a lot of people in this region. It's affected a lot of you personally. But from the people I've been talking to most recently, including a fire ecologist who I thought was really sharp and really opened my eyes to a lot of things, I've started thinking that maybe we should flip around the way we're thinking about fire prevention and really dedicate a lot more money and energy and attention to starting where people are at to start with, and starting with our communities and then moving outward from there, instead of dedicating so much funding and so much attention to the backcountry. The fact is that if we enable people to build more fire-resistant housing, or when they're going to make improvements to their homes, give them incentives to actually put on a fire-resistant roof, make some of these changes to the structure of their homes, and give people more support to actually be doing the work they need to do to have defensible space around their home. Many homes and structures, under those circumstances, with those improvements, can then survive a fire that might come through. And so, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding that we've had, where we've been so focused on, fire suppression in backcountry areas, that we haven't invested enough in our communities. And there are certainly some types of prevention that we're currently using that we should continue using and expand, like building fire breaks. But again, some of you've experienced this, that when there's a large fire, embers from the fire can be flying 1 mile or 2 miles in advance of the fire, and a fair number of the structures that are lost can be just from embers falling there and catching a home on fire. So for example, I do think that we need to look at creating tax incentives for people who are making changes to the structure of their home to make it more fire resistant. And I think that we need to flip around where we're dedicating our fire prevention spending, to dedicate more to the communities that are at the highest risk of fire. And there are some bills out there right now that start to do that start to move us in the right direction. There's one that's co-sponsored by Maria Cantwell that starts a little bit moving more of the funding toward communities, but I would want to sort of accelerate that change and really push to focus on where people are at and make that our top priority. Yeah.
Yeah, Regina, regarding fire, fire insurance for people in this county, well, all of our counties that are affected by the tree mortality and fire, is a huge issue. And the Trump administration, I don't know if it was last year or this year, said that if you sustain a fire loss, that's no longer, you're no longer able to use that as a tax deduction in your federal taxes. How would you address that problem and other issues surrounding the reluctance of insurance companies to insure people in these counties and who drop people in these counties?
Yeah, so thank you for raising that. It's a really important issue. I mean, first of all, when it comes to fire losses being tax deductible, I mean, I absolutely think we need legislation to restore that. I think that was absolutely wrong. I also think that we need to make sure that that fires are treated fairly when we're considering which disasters get FEMA assistance. Because right now, unfortunately, you can have multiple smaller but related fires, and my understanding is they get counted as separate incidents, and that they don't necessarily aggregate to be large enough to count as a disaster where FEMA will get involved. So I think that we need to be lowering the threshold at which, or making sure that when there is a fire that's seriously impacting a community, or a series of related fires, that people are able to get the assistance that they need. I mean, otherwise it can be just devastating for a community. When it comes to fire insurance, so there are some sort of changes in programs at the state level. Some of you may have experience with this, that there is supposed to be an insurance program, kind of last resort, that's administered by the state of California. So some of this is a state matter. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not totally clear on how much the federal government can do to try to protect consumers. But this is something that's a priority for me, and that I really would want to look into and try to figure out the most that we can do at the federal level. Because, I mean, I've heard stories from people, some of you may have experienced this, that have been paying their fire insurance for years and years responsibly. Suddenly their company drops them. There was one family that I was talking to in Cathy's Valley, and their company dropped them right at the beginning of fire season. Right now you can drop someone in the middle of the year when you've paid for all those nice wet months, and then all of a sudden it's this time of the year and there's some fire risk that's coming in the next few months, and they can just cut you off at that point. I think that's completely unfair, and I think we do clearly need more consumer protections. That said, I know that a lot about insurance is controlled at the state level, so I would honestly have to take a look and see if that's something where we would all need to be pushing for some change at the state level, or if there is a role for the federal government to get involved. But I think you're absolutely right to flag it as a huge issue.
Okay, there's a couple of questions about Yosemite. We call it the park.
Okay, the park.
The park. Okay, and so they kind of come from different sides. Let me start with this one. How would you address the longstanding dependency on tourism to the park by Tuolumne, Mariposa, Madera, and the transit occupancy tax and so forth, that will start in large parts of the budget of these counties, and the sort of dependency on tourism? Have you thought about that one? Tell us about that.
So it sounds like the person asking the question is seeing the dependency on tourism as a problem, and is seeing a need to diversify the economy here. And, I would really agree with that. I think that there are some things that we can do at the federal level to try to make sure there's a climate here, where people can do business, where this is, a good place for people to run all sorts of different businesses, some of which involve tourism, some of which don't. I do think that the internet issue is significant here, and that's something where we could make a difference at the federal level, and could really enable people to do a lot of different types of work, or to do more telecommuting, to do more work that's complementary to the ebbs and flows of the tourist seasons. I'll tell you at different points in the past, I myself have done interpreting and translation work, for example, and there's some types of work like that you can do kind of on a piece-by-piece basis, and that could be complementary to tourism here. So I think that having internet access and better internet access here could open up more possibilities for people. I think that we need to keep investing in our schools and make sure that young people are having a great education while they're here, and hopefully getting hooked up with local employers. I do think that continuing to make sure that our federal workers are treated well, and that we're actually hiring people, appropriately into permanent positions as much as possible, instead of using so many people who are on short-term contracts for whom it's very unpredictable to live here. Could help sort of stabilize the local economy some, and even out some of the bumps and ebbs and flows that go with the seasons. So, I also think, actually when we look at, employment across our district, social services, education, and healthcare are some of the other biggest employers here. And, that's where when you have someone like Tom McClintock, who's proposing cuts in all those areas, that's actually threatening jobs at the local level here. And it's threatening the livelihoods of families, even if just one person who works in one of those fields loses their job here. That might be enough to drive a whole family out, right? And then you have the schools shrinking even further, then you have fewer education jobs available, and it kind of contributes to this cycle. So I think it's also important for us to recognize that, providing good services to the other members of our community and taking good care of people here, it's not just the right thing to do for our students, for our seniors, for people who need medical care, it's also creating jobs here in the community.
Well, this comes from the other side in a sense, and that is, do you have a vision, or what is your vision for resolving issues related to the high levels of use of Yosemite, and particularly following the resolution of a lawsuit against the National Park Service by the Friends of Yosemite Valley. So this is the other side. What about high levels of use and protecting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I very much support the creation of a visitor center to Yosemite that is not in the park itself, but in a gateway community, potentially here. I would love to know if any of you here had any experience with the proposed visitor center that was brought up years ago, which I understand Tom McClintock was actually quite pivotal in killing. Yes?
Yeah, well, the Yosemite Conservancy owns 2 parcels of land, one of which is right behind the existing visitor center and one is across the street from that. And their intention has been to have the visitor center that's outside the park in this community on those parcels of land.
Right. Yeah, and my understanding is that when this was brought up in, I believe, 2013, does that sound right? All right, it was either 2012, 2013-ish, around then. My understanding is that the Chamber of Commerce was in favor of this here. I mean, that it actually, that the visitor center proposal that existed then actually had pretty bipartisan support, and, you know, was not able to have a committee go forward in Congress, largely because of McClintock. And, you know, I think that I'm always open to suggestions from people who are living the reality of these impacts, you know, and working in the park and are really the experts on the issue. I mean, I really respect their expertise. But, you know, my take on this at the moment is that it could make a tremendous amount of sense to actually have a visitor center that is outside the boundaries of the park, perhaps here, as you're describing, and, you know, provide an area for people to get out of their cars, get on shuttle buses instead. Yeah.
Well, that was my question. So I will clarify.
Right.
My question relates to the requirements of the resolution of the lawsuit that caps daily visitation and maximum visitation at one time. And how will we, as a community, reconcile the dependency on tourism in the park with the caps that are currently in place in a legal decision?
Well, I think this is largely something that we would want to encourage, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, the local government to be thinking about, because you guys are the experts. I mean, my immediate reaction just to this conversation is to encourage people to spend a few days in the surrounding area and spend one day in the park, maybe. I mean, right, if we're talking about a lot of people wanting to come, and, you know, somebody wants to come on their 3 or 4 day trip, if we're trying to reduce the numbers of people who are in the park at any given moment, folks can still go, but maybe if we built out more things for them to do in the surrounding area and have better communication, better planning, you know, as a visit to the Yosemite region, rather than a visit to just the park, that's one idea that occurs to me off the top of my head, is keep people coming to the area. Maybe they spend a little less time in the park, but maybe they spend a little more time in town, doing other activities. I mean, obviously there are other beautiful natural areas that are here that are not outside the boundaries of the park and are really underexplored, and, you know, I don't want to say undervisited, but are not visited as frequently right now. And so, you know, but I would love to do that kind of brainstorming with people here right now, just, you know, kind of trying to think of solutions off the top of my head.
Well, I have a tour business here taking people into Yosemite, and a lot of people from all over the world come and they schedule one day out of their worldwide vacation, so they're not interested in anything going inside the park, and I deal with it every day. So there's a limitation on how much you can disperse the population, because they're only here for 2 nights and 1 day.
No, I completely understand that. That is the case for some folks. Absolutely. All right. So,
Okay,
all right, let's go to the next one.
Regina, Morris supporters are saying you've taken campaign money from special interests and from corporations. Can you confirm? And can you explain that and clarify?
Is that Morris or Morse? Morse. Okay, apparently Morse supporters are saying that I've taken campaign contributions from where?
Special interests and corporations.
Special interests and corporations. No, that is not true. And if people are out there saying that about me, that is not true. Our campaign is actually unique in this race in that we have absolutely no special interest money. I have no PAC money. Jessica Morse herself is taking PAC money in large quantities. So you can go on opensecrets.org. I recommend that, opensecrets.org. You can click on our race. You can see the breakdown of contributions that we've taken from PACs or not. You'll see a big 0 by my name. You'll see tens of thousands of dollars by her name. So it is actually quite ironic that supporters of that other candidate would be saying that I'm taking the type of money that she is taking. I'm also really proud of the
Are you saying
fundraising.
that if it was offered, you turn it down?
What's that?
Are you saying that if it was offered, you would turn it down?
Some of the money she's taken, yes. So Steny Hoyer, for example. Steny Hoyer is the whip. He is the House whip for the Democratic Party. That means it is his job to get members of the House to vote a particular way once they are in office. And she's taken $7,000 from him, $2,000 from his campaign, and $5,000 from his PAC. I do not plan to take money from the House whip in this race. I think that it's poor judgment in a district where we know that there are only 29% registered Democrats. The only way a Democrat can win in this district is to be able to say credibly that they're going to be an independent voice for our district and actually make the decisions that are right for our district and not be tightly controlled by, the leadership of the National Democratic Party. And so I do think that's a choice, for example, that I would not have made. So that's, I guess, the answer to your question. In terms of all this stuff about taking money from corporations, no federal candidate is allowed to take money from corporations that are corporate contributions. So we certainly have not done that either.
You have an excellent education. Why do you not mention it and stress it in your materials? It seems to me to be a plus.
Okay, why do I not talk about my education? I think I do talk about my education. I mean, I just opened up telling you guys about my fellowship from the National Science Foundation, which, by the way, I was really proud to have won. I'm a very persistent person, and I actually had to apply twice to that fellowship program because it's very competitive. The first time I applied, I got an honorable mention, and I said, I'm going back again. That means I almost got it. That means I should apply again the next year. And I did. I actually won the thing, and it was a very big deal. So, I'm very proud of the accomplishments that I've had throughout my career. My dissertation that I ended up completing actually won a national award for the best in its field. As a graduate student, I published an article in the very top journal in my field, which, if you're a researcher, is a big deal. Sometimes I don't mention some of these things because they don't, necessarily mean a lot to people who aren't in the academic field. But since we got a question about it, let's go crazy. Let's do it. And so I ended up publishing that article as a graduate student. It's very uncommon to have a single authored article, in this particular journal, which is very difficult to get into. Even more so to have that happen when you're a graduate student. And then that article actually won the award for the best in the journal that year. So it was a rather big deal within my field. And, to be quite honest, that's why for me it's been a big decision to step away from my career and come run for Congress. I would have very much liked to continue doing the research that I was doing. I really liked my teaching. I felt like I was on a good trajectory in my career, but I decided that this is more important. I think that this is really a time when all of us have to step up and do big, dramatic, exciting, scary things and try our hardest to make a difference. And, I felt after the 2016 election that someday my own kids were going to look back. And they were going to say, what did you do? What did you do to make a difference? And I felt like I couldn't just tell them, well, I kept up my career as usual. I kept publishing my papers. I kept teaching my students and just sort of hope for the best. I think this is a time when we all need to be making a difference. You all clearly feel the same way because you're here tonight, you're getting involved, and I'm really grateful for that and asking you to spread the word to your neighbors too.
Okay.
With comment, yeah.
So do you have a doctorate?
Yes.
Okay, why aren't you talking about the doctorate?
Oh, okay, sorry. So I do have my PhD. That was what I was referring to when I was talking about my dissertation.
Okay.
So yeah, my PhD is what I wrote my dissertation for. It's a PhD in political science from Yale. And within the political science department there, I was in a program that's part of the department called the Program on Order, Conflict, and Violence. And I actually love talking about my work and my research and my teaching. We were just talking about it in the car on the way here a little bit when we had no cell phone service and couldn't do any other work or make any phone calls or anything. But yes, I definitely have my PhD.
Well,
Another follow-up
let me
question.
ask you why I'm asking about that. Because
Yeah.
I get very frustrated in phone conversations with Tom McClintock, trying to get around to the point where he can comprehend what an issue is. And so what I'm asking is, do either of your opponents, either Tom McClintock or Jessica Morse, have the ability from education standpoint to get in and comprehend what a problem is, to solve the problem, and then in order to communicate that with other people, because you can't do anything by yourself. You've got to get other people to agree with your points, and that's how Congress works. So do the other two people have that ability and the education that you obviously have, that you can dedicate yourself to a problem and find a solution that's proper for your constituents?
Okay, I see our live stream cameras panning back. Hi, guys. I think that's for the voters to decide. I mean, I think the voters should look at each of us and look at who we are and how we operate. And I can't really speak to what other people would do or could do. But what I can tell you is that, I do think that my own experience and training is a real asset. And it's something that we need more of in Congress. I'm really committed to evidence-based policymaking. And in this era of Trump and alternative facts and, I think that we need people who understand science, who understand evidence, who understand how to evaluate data. And that's really who I am. And I apologize that sometimes I kind of hedge on questions a little bit if I don't have all the right information in front of me, because I actually want to see that information. And I'm a pretty, pragmatic person. I'm not really an ideological person at my core. I want to see the evidence. And the question in my mind is, how do we do something in the most effective way possible that's going to help the most people or get the best outcome, and do that in the most efficient way possible, and in most cases as quickly as possible. Those are the kind of constraints that I want to look at. So I do think that I bring, a set of skills that we need more of in Congress. No offense to lawyers, but we have a lot of lawyers in Congress already. We have a lot of people who are career politicians like Tom McClintock. And the great thing about 2018 is we have a lot of other types of people running for Congress all across the country. It's not just me, or, frankly, Rosa Calderon here in our district. Also, she has sort of more of a scientific reasoning background, and is, I believe, a geoscientist and geographer and cartographer. There are people like her and like me running for Congress all over the country right now. People who are engineers, scientists, researchers, doctors. And we need those types of reasoning in government also. And I also think that being an evidence-based pragmatic person makes it easier to have conversations across the aisle or conversations with people with whom you might disagree. Because, instead of coming at it from such different angles, I feel like I'm in a position to be able to say, show me the evidence. If you can show me that this is going to work, and you can show me that if you're going to get good outcomes and the data's there, let's have a conversation about it. That's an easier conversation to have than really being in a kind of values-based conflict with someone.
Quick follow-up
Yeah.
on that, then how do you deal with somebody across the aisle who thinks that throwing rocks into water is what's causing I'd like to hear how you as a person would deal with that type of idiocy. It's insanity. How do you not hit them?
Well, we don't need to hit them. I would never encourage that. We do need to vote them out of office. So that's step one. We've got somebody just like that in office here in our district. I don't know if any of you heard the program on Capitol Public Radio recently about Tom McClintock and environmental policies and what changes could be coming for our district. I highly recommend that you listen to it. If you go over to the website for Capitol Public Radio and you just search for Tom McClintock, I think it's a story that everyone here will enjoy listening to because they featured all candidates in the race against McClintock. They even brought in, I think Robert Lawton himself might have been in it also. I really think they went to every candidate in the race. And the takeaway from the story is really that, McClintock is just willfully ignorant of science and that almost anyone will be a significant improvement on him. And, so I think that I hope voters can have a bit higher standards in our own district and in the country as a whole. And we need to shine a light on some of these people who are just not willing to comprehend evidence and hopefully get at least some of them out of office. Because I think that when you're going to go try to sort of negotiate or work with someone on an issue, I do think I would rather start by approaching people who are maybe from the other party but are a little bit more like-minded, a little bit more evidence-based. And that's where I think some of these bipartisan caucuses that exist in Congress can be really helpful. because there's a pool of people there who are Republicans who also decided to join up. So people who are in the Climate Solutions Caucus. There's another bipartisan caucus that we joined. It's called the Problem Solvers Caucus. Those are people who are both half Republicans, half Democrats, but have agreed they want to come together and work on a few common issues at a time. In my mind, that's where you start a conversation. And then you deputize some of those people and you say, hey, can you go talk to that other crazy guy or gal from your party? And maybe you can get through to them. You got to work with some allies on this sometimes.
I was going to say, if you could trade the lawyer vote for the women's vote, you probably go all the way ahead.
That's what we're trying to do.
You've described yourself as a moderate Democrat. Can you expand on that and tell us what distinguishes you from other candidates in this race and why it's important in this district?
Okay. So I actually really disagree with this whole exercise of trying to put labels on different types of Democrats. I just think it's not helpful and it honestly doesn't really make sense in the context of this race. Because maybe there are some races out there where you can really line people up and you can say, here's the most liberal person, here's the most moderate or conservative person. Well, for McClintock, he would be like out the door. I mean, he would be way off the charts. But for everybody else, it's sort of complicated. So I would definitely say that in some ways I'm a moderate person in the sense that I really see the value of compromise, dialogue, discussion. I think that's how government works best. That's also, the kind of perspective that you need to have to represent this district as a Democrat, because you have to go into this, eyes wide open, that if I somehow succeed at this and beat Tom McClintock when he was in office, I would be representing primarily people who do not belong to the same political party that I do. So you have to be really respectful and, really willing to engage in a very open back and forth with them, and make sure that everyone knows that everyone's voice matters, everyone's needs are important. That said, there are some areas where I think that I'm the most progressive person in the race. And, I think of progressive as really meaning being dedicated to progress and change and pushing forward. So climate is one of those areas where I think if you stacked up the candidates in the race and said, who has the strongest position on climate change, I can't see any way to do that and, have me not come out as having the strongest position. When we were here at this forum, we were asked, I think a very specific question about a carbon fee and dividend. And, there are no other candidates in this race who are willing to say that they support a carbon fee and dividend. And I can't understand why not. I just can't understand why not. From my take on the district, from the data that I've seen, we know that a majority of people in our district here, a large majority, 69% believe climate change is real, 68% think it's a serious threat to future generations. So, and again, in our district's only 29% Democrats. So this is not only an issue that matters for Democrats, it matters for all sorts of different kinds of people here. We know that this is something that's important for the district, and it's important for the majority of people here. So I think you need to have the option of voting for somebody who's actually going to take a strong position on it. So, I guess kind of answers the question, kind of doesn't. I guess I would just say that, if somebody tries to label any candidate in this race just as, oh, that person is moderate, that person is progressive, you should say, hold up. Let's go through it issue by issue. Let's think about it issue by issue. No, I don't think it's quite that straightforward at all. Given the hue of that question, I would also like to clarify that I've heard a lot of crazy things about myself in the course of the campaign. This always happens if you're running for office. I've heard people say, oh, that Regina, she's a Republican. No, that's not true. I've never been a registered Republican. I've heard people say, oh, that Regina, she's a Republican plant. Republicans told her to come run for this office or something. That is completely untrue. I've also specifically been told that apparently I worked for a Republican member of Congress after I graduated from college. That is also untrue. When I graduated from college, I actually got my security clearance and my medical clearance to join the Foreign Service just about concurrent, right when I was graduating. They offered me a spot to start in September of that year, 2004. I ended up being a public interest law fellow for 3 months in between while I was waiting for my start date in September. And so I actually ended up working on a human rights trial related to the assassination of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador. For strange and complicated reasons, the trial was actually held in Fresno. So I spent a decent amount of time in Fresno that summer working on this trial and then went straight off to the Foreign Service. So I most definitely have never worked for a Republican member of Congress. I was, however, an intern for Barbara Boxer once in college.
Well, let's stay with your career for a moment. In the area of international experience, this questioner says, how was your 2 years issuing and denying visas in an embassy in Guatemala superior to Morris' 1.5 years working with the State Department alongside troops in Iraq?
Interesting question. So I don't have a great deal of knowledge of what exactly Jessica Morris was doing in Iraq. I understand she went there as a writer for USAID and spent most of her time in the green zone, spent some time outside of it. I can't really speak to what she was doing there. Of course, I have a great deal of respect, though, for the work that she was doing, and I know that her superiors have spoken very highly of the work that she was doing at the time. So I think it's kind of strange to try to say, here's this little bit of your experience, here's this little bit of that experience, tell us why one is better than the other. It's kind of an odd question. I am, however, very happy to tell you more about the work that I was doing in Guatemala. So I've always been very clear with people, and I'm going to repeat this again here, that I was a junior officer when I was in Guatemala. Now, when you join the Foreign Service, first of all, becoming a Foreign Service officer is hard. And you know, I want to say very clearly that within the last day and a half or so, people have been posting all sorts of things on the internet, including on the site of Sierra Forward, you know, on the sites of large organizations in our district, saying, how could Regina say that she joined the Foreign Service after 9/11? Look, she started in 2004. Yes, that's exactly right. It takes a really long time to join the Foreign Service. It's one of the most difficult hiring processes you can go through, you know, to try to get hired by the federal government. So here's the timeline of what ended up happening and then later what I did for them. So, of course, 9/11 happened in September 2001. That was when I was starting my sophomore year of college. And, you know, right away, I actually felt that engagement and diplomacy and communication would be really critical to ratcheting down some of the tensions that we were facing and, you know, improving engagement, improving our safety in the long run. So I actually started taking Arabic straight away. That was the first thing I did, right in that academic year, right after 9/11. A lot of people don't know this necessarily, that's why I'm sharing it with you. I don't mention it that often because I'm really bad at Arabic, it turns out. It's a very difficult language. I'm extremely proud of my Spanish. You know, I love speaking Spanish. I've spent a lot of time in Latin America. I can muddle through some French. I can fake my way through Portuguese. Arabic. That's some serious stuff. But I really wanted to learn, you know, and I really had that curiosity. And, you know, at the time, Stanford was actually swamped with students that had the same idea. They had to pull out every possible instructor they could find to come teach Arabic. So many people wanted to take it. And so I did have a really great instructor and stuck with it for a year. Confirmed at the end of the year that this is not my natural gift in the world. But I learned a lot. You know, I learned a lot about the culture and history. I did learn to muddle through some Arabic. I can do some basic reading and things. But I still had in my mind, I said, okay, you know, becoming really fluent in Arabic and helping us to literally communicate with the rest of the world might not be my skill. What is it I'm going to do? And I, you know, really came back to the Foreign Service. And I just said, yes, this is where we should be investing. You know, I really think that we need to be building up diplomacy, and that's the role I want to play. And so I went and took the Foreign Service exam, the very first opportunity I had. You had to be, at the time, at least 20 to take the exam. So I turned 20 in July of 2002 and took the exam in September. And I actually passed on the first try. This is kind of unusual. I mean, it's a pretty difficult test. Some people spend years studying for it or take it when they're much older because they feel like they need to have more experience to do it. You have to, it's the government though. You know, you have to wait quite a while to find out if you can pass. I had to wait months and months to get the results back. And then they assigned me to take the oral exam in Washington, D.C. the following summer. It's this whole multi-step process. So July 2003 was my date to go take the oral exam, which is it's the closest thing I've ever experienced to being in a reality TV show. You show up at this office, they lead you through all these hallways, you're with a group of people for the whole day, and you're in a room kind of like this. There are people watching in the corners while you're doing everything, and you have to do exercises with the group. You also have to give presentations, you have to read through materials and write up essays really fast and memos about them. You get interviewed individually by the people doing the And then you find out at the end of the day if you passed or not. So you find out right the same day. They sit you all down in a waiting room and call you in one by one, and everyone's very nervous. And I was one of the last people to be called in out of my group, and that was because I'd actually passed. You know, I was one of the few people to pass out of my group, even though I was by far the youngest person there. There were people there who were decades older than I was. And so I actually did pass out of my first try. But then you have to get your medical clearance and your security clearance. And in my case, I also had to finish college. I had a year left of college. So I started the process to get my top secret security clearance and to get a worldwide medical clearance. And those things take a long time. So it was really into the next spring, I think, was when the security clearance came through. And my medical clearance took longer because I actually have this bone condition that they were concerned about, and I had to get some extra paperwork for it and things. So it was really right at the time that I was graduating in June 2004 when those clearances finally came through. And then they were able to call me up and say, yeah, we would like to offer you a spot in the A100 class that's starting in September 2004. So that is the basic training class that everyone goes off to and does together. You know, that training I think was really valuable. Everyone in the Foreign Service is a generalist, and that means that you need to have some knowledge of what all the different roles are in the Foreign Service, and you're worldwide available, so they can send you anywhere they need you, basically. I mean, they try to take into account people's preferences, but they try to do a really solid job of training everyone, no matter where you're first assigned or assigned for your second assignment. You know, in my case, they also take into account language. We've already established I'm not good at Arabic. If you remember, I barely kind of passed the French test, but I did really well on their Spanish test, and you know, got almost the very top score that we can get on the Spanish test. And so they said you would be a really good fit for Latin America. They really needed people to do consular work in Latin America, and that's the nature of the job. You go where you're told to go. And so I did the consular training in Washington D.C., which for everyone at the time, you know, really emphasized detecting terrorist travel and preventing terrorists from being issued to come into the United States. Because if you remember, unfortunately, consular officers actually issued visas to the 9/11 hijackers. And this was the mantra of the Foreign Service at the time. And you have to put yourself in the mindset of 14 years ago. But the mantra was, never again will we issue visas to terrorists. And this was really drilled into all of us. So we actually got quite a bit of training in how to prevent that from happening. And, you know, read through the appendix on terrorist travel from the 9/11 Commission, actually went through the visa applications of the hijackers. And you can take a look at the annotations the officers made in the margins. And, you know, really got some, I think, some top-notch instruction, all the changes that have been made in the department to prevent that from happening again. And I should say explicitly, you know, in response to an article that was published in the Sacramento Bee, part of which I disagree with strongly, the entire logic of border security at the time was that we shouldn't have low-threat posts and high-threat posts. We shouldn't have, you know, places where visa applicants face hard scrutiny, and places that are sort of easier soft posts where people are kind of lax about security, kind of lax about really doing those background checks or not. The whole logic was that at the time, I think it was 200, there were 211 posts around the world where Foreign Service officers were operating. You know, that each and every one of those 211 posts is a really important part of our national security, and, you know, making sure that we're not issuing visas to terrorists. And there were actually concerns in those early years after 9/11 that terrorists, even from the Middle East, could exploit our soft southern border and could have taken advantage of the human trafficking networks that smuggle lots of people into the U.S., in addition to drugs and weapons. You know, that hasn't happened in large numbers that we, the general public, are aware of. But it was very much top of mind at the time. It was very much an active concern. So that was definitely part of the job of being a consular officer there, was making sure that we're doing the background checks correctly, making sure that we're not asleep at the wheel. You know, I always say that it's a good thing that Central America never developed into a major transit point for large numbers of terrorists to try to come into our country and do us harm. But if we had not done our jobs, If we'd all just said, let's go to the beach and drink margaritas, who cares about those background checks? I'm just gonna hit approve, 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 approve. That word would have gotten around, right? And so the logic at the time was really that we need to have excellent standards for security and, preventing terrorists and anyone else who would do us harm needed to be top of mind no matter what post you ran around the world. So I see a new person with their hand up, and then I'm going to go to you, so I got a question.
Okay, just to why I'm voting for you, one of the reasons is because of your consular service. I read a book called Visas for Al-Qaeda. Have you ever heard of it?
I have not read that particular book, but it sounds like something that I would be very
It is
interested
very
in.
well documented, and if anybody ever doubts the importance of the job which you did, they just need to read that book to see how we got from point whatever it was to 9/11, because it's all spelled out in there, and the author's last name is Springman.
Okay, thank you. I would also add that both the ambassador to Guatemala at the time and the DCM, who's the second in charge of any embassy around the world, both of those folks took a look at the Sacramento Bee article and really strongly disagreed with it, and really strongly disagreed with the author's characterization of what was happening inside the embassy there. And she didn't interview anyone from the State Department, anyone who worked with me, or anyone from the embassy. So they have quite strong written statements they both issued, which are on our Facebook page, and people can take a look if they'd like to see, what was the ambassador's take on this at the time? Was the ambassador concerned that terrorists might try to enter the U.S. through Central America? And the answer is yes, he was very actively concerned about that, as was the DCM. Kelly.
Okay, so these are foreign issues, but as for terrorism, this coincides with that. Would you support legislation allowing translators from Iraq and Afghanistan to come to the United States since their lives are in danger?
Yes. So this is a question about helping translators from Iraq and Afghanistan to come to the U.S. Yes, I absolutely think that those folks need to be able to come, and need to be able to come sooner. Right now a lot of their cases have been held up, and I'm really, really concerned by some of the measures that the Trump administration has taken to restrict the entry of refugees into our country. We know that refugees are the most heavily vetted applicants, and in the case of somebody who's already been put in a position of trust, literally working alongside our troops, literally risking their life for our troops, they've already passed the toughest test that anyone can pass in terms of showing their loyalty. So yes, I absolutely think we do need to do more.
Well, follow-up related to that, would you support...
We'll get back to the format here in a second.
Okay. The continuing resolution on the War Powers Act, do you think that President Trump and the GOP Congress is correct in saying that we can go into different countries like Syria under the Iraq War Power Act?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Real simple. All right, we'll go back to our queue.
Okay, if you do not advance to the general election after the primary June 5th, will you pledge to support whichever Democrat does, and will you encourage your supporters to do so we can collectively go on to defeat Clinton?
That's an easy question. Yes. All right, next one.
Have you ever voted in this congressional district?
Yes, I have. I proudly cast my first votes here for years. So when I was growing up, I'll tell you I was no fan of John Doolittle. I don't think you all ever had the privilege or burden of being represented by John Doolittle. Or did you live in the northern part of our district?
Yeah. I lived in Sacramento.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, there's been a lot of redistricting, but John Doolittle represented the old 4th District, that started sort of Placer and El Dorado counties and then went north for a long time. My very first question that I ever asked of a politician was directed to him. I went on our school's 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. We got to see him. He came out of the Capitol. All the little 8th graders, we talked to him outside. And me being me, I put up my hand because I had a question about the Auburn Dam, which is a dam that's been proposed in the northern part of our district. It was something he was trying to push through for years. Even as a 13-year-old, I thought the environmental costs of that would be quite steep, and it seemed like a bad investment and bad use of government money. So I asked him a hard question about the Auburn Dam, and he answered it. We didn't see eye to eye, but he at least had the respect and the professionalism and, a sense of service to come out and talk with students from our region. I've run into people who are running those 8th grade trips today, and a few people have actually told me that it's now difficult or impossible for the students who go on those trips to meet with McClintock. Sometimes they actually have to go meet with Ami Bera instead, because he's the nearest legislator that's willing to talk to them. And I think that's outrageous. But getting back to voting, yes, I did vote in the Roseville area in Placer County for years. Even when I was in the Foreign Service, my residence was in Roseville, technically. And, you have to vote somewhere. You can't just vote, unaffiliated with any locality if you're abroad. So the Placer County clerk helped me to get my ballots and actually vote. I'll tell you that there was one point when I was in training in Virginia, and I think it was the presidential year, and I decided to vote in the presidential election in Virginia rather than voting here, because frankly I thought it would make a bigger difference. But with that exception, I was basically voting in Placer County, most of the time from 2000 to 2006.
Okay, there's 2 questions on the kind of campaign, on your campaign specifically. One, you promised in Placerville and Oakhurst to support the clear front runner with Jessica's endorsement, presumed by the Democratic by the San Diego Convention and Superior Fundraising. She's clearly the front runner. Why have you revoked the promise that you made?
All right, so, sorry, there's something in my eye. All right, the question is stating that I once promised to support the front runner in this race. It sounds like a front runner to be determined on the basis of fundraising and on the basis of other things. So I'm first going to clarify that the only public statements or commitments that were ever made in this race by any candidates were commitments to support the endorsed candidate of the Democratic Party, the California Democratic Party. Now, all candidates originally, months and months ago last fall, when we would line up and we would get asked these questions, would say, yes, they're going to support the endorsed candidate of the Democratic Party. Everyone changed their minds. All the candidates walked back those commitments. If any of you go back and watch the video from the forum that was held in Mariposa, for example, you'll notice, I think that was actually the night that the other 2 candidates changed their minds. If you look carefully at their answers, they did not say they would support the endorsed candidate of the party at that point, and they did not say they would drop out in the future if someone else was the endorsed candidate. So my view is that everyone changed their minds about this at different points in time. I will be fully straight with you that I was the last person to change my mind. This is something where I've changed my mind. And circumstances worked out very differently than I expected. I thought that if our delegates were going to go to the state convention and actually vote to endorse someone, they would be supporting the candidate who had the most grassroots support here in our district. And that's not what happened. In terms of in-district fundraising, I've always had the most support and have actually raised many times more donations, I forget the exact multiple, but multiple times more money here in our district than, for example, Jessica Morse has. The latest analysis from OpenSecrets.org is that about 9% of her contributions are from inside the district, and over 30% of ours are from inside the district, which is the highest percentage in the race. When we had fora Q&A sessions where all the candidates would stand up and answer questions, most of those sessions featured a ballot that the audience got to fill out and mark off who they preferred among the candidates. That wasn't the case here at the forum that was held here, but it was at most of the others that were held throughout the district, including in Angels Camp, in Lincoln, in other locations. And the voters, or the people, the audience members of those events, actually consistently preferred me. In some cases, out of a 4-person field, I would get an absolute majority of the votes. And that is some of the information that our clubs took into account when they initially voted about who they'd like to support. And the majority of our clubs voted to support me. And yet, and I see someone making a face, that's actually true. If you
Mariposa Club did not.
I understand that, but I'm talking about the majority of clubs in the whole district. And if you add up the club delegates who went into the endorsement process, 65% of them were sent to go vote for me in that process. It was the delegates who are not bound to any club who decided en masse to vote for a different candidate and to support Jessica Morse. Now, that's their right.
44 to 13 to 2. Are you saying that many?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So you're referring to the final vote that was held in San Diego.
Yeah.
And the reason for the numbers you just read off is because our clubs had no representation in San Diego. That is true. So what happens is there are two steps to this. There was a pre-endorsement conference in Modesto. That was much closer. And the reason it was much closer is because, as I said, 65% of the club delegates who got to vote there were sent and instructed by their clubs to come and support me, vote for me, and they did. It was the Central Committee members and the ADEMs who are allowed to vote just, according to their judgment, according to their conscience or their decision, who did vote there en masse for Jessica Morse. What then happened at the state convention, weeks later, is that the club representatives who got votes in Modesto do not get to vote at the state convention. That's why the total number of people who got to vote at the caucus at the state convention was much smaller than the number of people who got to vote in Modesto.
But the people who did vote in San Diego are representative of the community. They are people who went there in good faith to vote as decent.
Well, so that's a matter of debate and discussion. So it is true that the people who voted in San Diego are from the 4th District. I think it is true that they were acting in good faith and they were making what they felt was the best decision. I don't dispute any of that. Where I would disagree is that their actions clearly did not reflect, a lot of the data that we have from the district here. They did decide to vote to support the person who had the least in-district support in terms of fundraising. They did decide to support the person who had not won the straw polls that were held at the end of our candidate fora, and they did vote to support a person who had actually never lived in our district before 2017. That is true. If you're making a face like that is not true, I'm telling you something that is factually true. Jessica Morse had never lived in our district until summer 2017. She's never attended a school here, she's never held a job here, and she has never voted here. You can go check that. She herself will agree with that she's from Carmichael, which is in Ami Bera's district, and moved to Pollock Pines in summer 2017. I don't think.
Do you dispute that her family's property holdings are within district and that her family is in 5 generations in our district? Do you dispute that?
I don't actually know. So the question was, do I dispute that Jessica Morse's family has had property in our district for 5 generations? And do I dispute that her family is 5 generations from this district? I don't actually know the facts. I've never seen a deed or a title that has her name on it for property here in our district. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just means I'm not in possession of that information. I would encourage you to ask her to be more transparent about that. I will say though that I frankly find all this discussion of ancestry a little offensive. I am proud to be a first-generation Northern Californian. Is there anybody else here who's a first-generation Northern Californian? Okay, smattering of hands. And I will tell you some things about my family. My parents are originally from Minnesota. That's where my grandparents, lived most of their lives. My parents met each other in high school there. And then decided to move to Hawaii. They actually moved to a rural part of the Big Island, very close to the park where the volcano is now erupting and consuming neighborhoods. And that's where I was born. I was born in Hilo, Hawaii. And, my family has always been, I think, a family that's, adventurous and hardworking. But we did not inherit vast tracts of forest land here in the Sierra Nevada. I don't have a grandmother who worked at the telegraph booth at Donner Pass. I have grandparents who scrimped and saved to survive the Great Depression. I have a really hard-working background and, kind of a scrappy background, I think. We think of ourselves as a family of strivers and fighters. And, that's actually why my parents ended up deciding to move to this region when I was a tiny little kid and I was 2 years old, because they wanted to find a really great place to raise a family and a place where there was going to be great opportunities for their kids, where the future seemed bright. And that's why they chose to come and live here. I think that's why a lot of families choose to come and live in our district. People choose to retire here because it's also a great place to live and a great place to retire. I don't think there should be, any stigma or elevation of one person or the other just because a bunch of relatives chose to live here years ago or didn't choose to live here years ago. ago. You know, I think that's actually really contrary to some of our basic values in this country, that you should judge every person based on who they are, not based on, you know, what ancestors may or may not have done generations ago. So if you want to compare how many generations families have been living in this district and you want to cast your vote on that basis, go crazy and do it. And go vote for Jessica Morse. But if you want to vote for somebody who's hardworking and who really cares about the economic well-being of families here and the opportunities that matter for families here, then I'm asking for your vote, your support. I see a comment, then we'll go back to the questions.
Me?
Yeah.
How do you define grassroots?
Yeah, so I think of grassroots organizing as really being dependent on, you know, the support of normal people in our community. And that's one of the things that's been really inspiring to me, is to see so many people who have not been involved in politics before, people who have never done anything for a campaign before in the past besides just, you know, voting, people who've never had any contact with politics, really stepping up and getting involved. So how do I define grassroots? You know, I think about our house party coordinator who contacted me about a year ago, last May, and said exactly that. You know, she said, I'm a nonpartisan voter. I have never touched politics. I've never had anything to do with a campaign, but I feel like Tom McClintock does not speak for me, and I want to help you. You know, I want to just do what I can, contribute my time and my talents. And I said, great. And we talked about a couple options. We decided she recently retired from a career in business. She's very organized. And I said, let's do house parties. Let's make you the coordinator, and you can find our hosts, you can plan them out, you can contact people. You know, that's what I think of when I think of grassroots. I think of, you know, ordinary people stepping up and contributing what they can. And for some people, that's their time. For some people, that's their talents. For other people, that's monetary contributions. And, you know, that's where, when I talk about having the most grassroots support, what I mean is, in terms of donations, when you look at the data, that we have the highest percentage of small dollar donations, or excuse me, the highest percentage of our money coming from small dollar donations of anyone in the race, and also the highest percentage of our money coming from inside our district. So those are, you know, I think grassroots is both ordinary people stepping up, but it also matters that it's our grassroots, that it's our people here in our district who are the ones who are stepping up and getting involved. Okay, I'd like to, well, I see Suzette, I don't have an overwhelming number of questions, so maybe I'll just take another one from the audience.
Sure.
Go back to your queue, okay.
Fine.
All right, but internet people, if you have more questions, feel free to type them in because, you know, we've got room in our queue here. All right.
I apologize, maybe you said that the acoustics are not perfect.
Yeah.
So which acts have offered you money and you turned them down?
Well, I wouldn't say that anyone has approached me with checks and just said, here, do you want our money? I mean, the way most PACs work is that you as a candidate need to go find them, and you need to go apply to them, you need to fill out their paperwork, and you need to go try to get their money. It's in fact an entire subset of fundraising. You know, what some finance directors do is come up with strategies for PAC fundraising. So we're not really in communication with PACs currently at all.
Okay, there's still more questions about the campaign, the nature of the campaign. You pledged last year, it says, in Placerville and Oakhurst to run a clean, positive campaign. Why have you produced and distributed the recent negative flyer, mail piece, that mentions none of your positive attributes?
All right, so it's an interesting question. I do think it is really important that we are focused on beating Tom McClintock, and I think it is really important to be running a strong campaign that's based on my own strengths and attributes. And that is exactly what we're doing. That is what the vast majority of the communication coming out from our campaign is. That is why I'm out here doing this event with you right now. But it is also the case that I think we can all agree that we are here in this room because we want to go beat Tom McClintock. And that means that we need to put up a strong, credible candidate who is going to be in a good position to do well in the general election and to survive the attacks that will come from the Koch brothers, that will come from Tom McClintock himself when he hires opposition research firms, which he will do. And I can tell you why Tom McClintock is not saying anything, for example, about Jessica Morse's record right now. And that's because he's, excuse me?
Because you're doing it for him.
Well, I actually have a different explanation for this. I would say that he's sitting on his hands, and he's sitting on the sidelines, and he is hoping to see a candidate who he can easily defeat and crush emerge from our primary. Because the minute that happens, the full force of scrutiny, will be foisted on the candidate who is running in the general election here. And I can tell you that I think it is really important that we actually vet the candidates that are running here. Now, I wish that there had been some coherent process to do that here in our district. That is the case in most districts in the country. I'm going to tell you, I've applied for all different jobs in my life. I've even thinking about food service jobs and things in some cases. I have faced less scrutiny of my background in the process of becoming a Democratic candidate in this race than I have for almost any other job I've ever applied for. And this is the highest profile and most important job I've ever applied for. There is something wrong with that equation. I think that it was incumbent upon the Democratic Party here in our region to go actually verify our employment records. Go take a look at our tax returns. Go read our financial disclosures. I'm curious to ask you a question because I know have a lot of feedback and a lot of opinions. Have you read the financial disclosures of the candidates in this race?
Nope.
You have not? Can I ask if you know what that is?
Yes, I know what it is. I do not know where it's been.
Okay, so what is it in your understanding?
Financial disclosures for the individuals or their campaign.
For the individuals.
For the individuals, I understand that they are to fill out a form stating about their financial record, their taxes, how they earn their money.
Yeah, exactly. So that is actually a really accurate description that a financial disclosure, is a document that where if you're going to run for Congress, you are legally required to list, your most recent employment, going back about a year and a half or so, what your investments are. If you have a spouse, you have to list what their income is, who's paying them. And we have decided as a country that this is important information for voters to know in elections. I think it's also important information that political parties should take into account when deciding to endorse candidates or not endorse candidates. And for reasons that are baffling to me, the Democratic Party in our district and its delegates did not pull this information. It's a public record. It's a public form that has been public since last summer. This is not opposition research. This is not even digging around. This is something that's just publicly available. So where you can find it is you go to the website of the Clerk of the House, or you just throw into Google, Clerk of the House and financial disclosure. Just throw that into Google. And then you go to the site, and you have to choose if you're looking for a member or a candidate. So you can go check out Tom McClintock's finances also, and I recommend that you do so. I've read through there. That's how I know that he's taking his state pension while he's in Congress, even though when he originally ran, he said he wasn't going to take his state pension if he was elected. That's the kind of information you have to disclose there. I really feel that the party here did not do their due diligence by failing to even read public records about our candidates. And so I wish that a lot of this conversation had been had privately months ago. Right, so I'm not pointing you out, but I'm saying that I actually have gone through this exercise with the delegates from our district, and while they were in the decision-making process in the run-up to the endorsement, I was unable to find any of them who had read and really considered the financial disclosures. I'm going to get to you in a second, but I want to say first that, I really wish this conversation had been had in private back then. People were sending around emails to some of our central committees with titles like vet the candidates and raising some of these concerns. And these hard conversations were not had back then. Second thing I wish for is I wish for a stronger media presence in our district. I think that it's been shocking to me as a candidate to see how long our campaigns have gone on and sort of how significant they've become over time without a corresponding level of media attention and scrutiny toward the candidates. And that's a function of the region that we're in.
Okay, so you're implying that there's something wrong with Jessica's financial disclosure. You want to put it out there?
I'm saying that I wish folks would take a look at it. I think that...
So that you're not implying, or you are?
I like to let people take a look at the facts themselves and come to their own judgments. And the original question, was about the contents of the mailer, which makes reference to her work record. And, the question was kind of implying, asking, why am I the person who's in the position that has to raise these issues? My answer is that the party did not do their due diligence, and we do not have serious journalists in this region in a large enough quantity that they ever really looked into the candidates' backgrounds. So yes, I think that if a candidate has not had steady employment for multiple years, I think voters should be informed about that fact, and that is something that's reflected in her financial disclosure and also mentioned on the mailer, for example. And that is something that would have come up, I think, much earlier had people read through that document. That's just one example.
So and just to follow up, this question in your literature, that particular mailer said endorsed by Democrats.
That's right.
What did that mean?
All right, so endorsed by Democrats means that I'm endorsed by Democrats. And so there are multiple Democrats who've endorsed me. The party's leader in the state Senate, Senator Bill Monning, has endorsed me. He's a Democrat. Gina Garbolino, the former mayor of Roseville, Democrat. Scott Albert, city council member of Roseville, Democrat. A whole bunch of other folks. The list goes on and on, who are Democrats, who have endorsed me. Some people have said,
It's literal.
yeah, some people have said, oh, this logo on your mailer, it looks just like the logo of the endorsed by logo for the California Democratic Party. That is not true in the slightest. The colors are different. Ours has a little donkey. Frankly, I think our donkey is friendlier and more inviting than the seal that the California Democratic Party uses for its candidates. The color schemes are different. I mean, there's really no similarity between those two logos. But the fact of the matter is, however, that the California Democratic Party is just one piece of the puzzle when we were talking about the Democrats and what it means to be a Democrat. Individual Democrats have their own judgments. Our Democratic clubs had judgments that in many cases were different than that of the delegates who went to the state party convention. And it is important for people to understand that nationally, the DCCC, the Democratic Party nationally, is neutral in our race. So it is not the case that all Democratic Party support is lined up one way or another.
Okay,
All right, we're going to go to the next question.
Would you address
Okay, wait, all right, so Jay has been patient. All right, we'll do one question here, and then we're going to be more disciplined and go back to the queue.
Okay.
All right.
Question. Concerning Tom Clintock and opposition research, what is your greatest concern about, what would he pick up about you? What would he be his emphasis?
Sure, fair enough. So I will tell you that I think, me in particular, liberal overeducated elite, of course. That would be a framing. I think toward any Democrat who's running in our district, socialist, Marxist, he's going to use a lot of words like that toward almost anyone. That's general. Toward me also, I would expect a lot of criticism of the fact that I have 3 young children. This comes up a lot. This is the single thing that I'm criticized for the most in this race. Right before this event was starting, someone came up to me and said, that she was having trouble convincing her friends to vote for me because they looked at the fact that I had 3 young children and just said, oh, I'm not going to vote for someone with 3 young children. And
I think that's an asset.
well, so I would agree that I do think it's an asset. I think we don't have enough parents of young children, or especially mothers of young or even school-aged children in Congress. That's part of the reason we have the social policies that we have in this country. That's part of why we have such a disconnect between government and the needs of actual working families in our community. Even when we look at very young children, the majority of mothers of young children are actually working outside the home in our country at this point. So I think it's a good thing, but I would expect to see probably some degree of public criticism about that, sort of, Regina Bates' bad mother advertising. I imagine that he would go after my husband. My husband, if you look carefully at your brochures, is Indian, Canadian, American. So his parents are from India. He was born in Canada. He then immigrated to the U.S., got his green card, got naturalized. It's not strictly true to say that my husband is an immigrant from India. But again, we were talking about the xenophobia and frankly racism that's kind of floating around in our country right now. I fully expect you would see some sort of nasty personal attacks directed at me saying, oh, her husband's coming from India to take your jobs, or,
It might be worse if he came from Canada.
of both a nasty, unfair personal attack, but it's something that I would expect to have happen. I do think he would probably criticize me for having spent time on the East Coast to go to school there and work there for a period of time. On the other hand, Tom McClintock himself has absolutely no ties to our district, so that's a bit of, kind of a hypocritical thing for him to say. I think those are probably the main things. I think he would certainly say young, inexperienced, can't get the job done, but at this point he would probably say that toward any of the Democrats that are in our field because we're all young, and I think that's a great thing. Okay, we're going to go back to the queue. If you have a question, I think I'm going to have to impose a little bit of discipline here because we're running short on time. So if you have a question, do write it down on a card. Larry or Marshall can help you. If you put your hand up, we need more cards. That way we can just organize it and keep it a little more fair up here.
This question is how you would address gun safety and gun control issues in this district.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to note that when it comes to talking about guns, there is one thing where Tom McClintock and I do agree, and that's that I respect the Second Amendment. I absolutely respect the rights of law-abiding, responsible gun owners here in our district, and recognize that a lot of folks here own guns, and that's perfectly fine. And they go hunting, they enjoy shooting, and they do so responsibly. Where McClintock and I are different is in the need for universal background checks and the need to revive the federal assault weapons ban. I also really oppose some of the measures that Tom McClintock has supported that go against the recommendations of law enforcement. I think when we're talking about public safety, we should take some advice from the pros and from the people who really know how to keep us safe, from the ones who are out there trying to stop violence every day. And Tom McClintock has actually co-sponsored legislation that would remove restrictions on the sale of silencers and make it easier for people to buy armor-piercing bullets. And police chiefs nationwide actually opposed both of those proposals. And I agree with them. I'm going to side with our police chiefs on that and not Tom McClintock. I think that that's something that most voters in our district would agree with as well.
You're an academic. How can students be prepared in our schools to take a productive role in society and keep, at the same time, keeping them safe and mentally healthy?
Well, it's a great question. So, I think it's really important, as we've been talking about, to support a wide range of programs within our schools to make sure that students aren't, only focused on academics, but they have the opportunity to explore different careers. We were just talking about the Health Careers Academy at one of our schools on the way up here, to be able to explore different pathways while they're still in school and figure out what's a good fit for them. I also think that really having the the self-confidence and sort of the sense of contentment and well-being that's needed to go out and start conversations and be proactive. We were also, sorry, I'm gesturing this way because one of our interns is here, and we were talking about things about how to be successful in college and, what my experiences have been with students. I think that, students who are able to be proactive and seek out opportunities and, aren't afraid to go have conversations with professors and sort of ask for help and build those relationships. Those are the students who become the most successful, no matter what college or university that they're at. And so I think it's important that our students emerge from high school, not just with the book smarts they need, but with the interpersonal skills that are going to allow them to take advantage of other opportunities in their lives. All right, that's it. We got